Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. Concluding analysis now. In terms of health reform, Obama and his regime look more and more like the Hemlock Society. They are open proponents of euthanasia and indeed of genocide. Obama has talked about his moral crisis about his mother's hip replacement operation. Obama has praised hospices. Obama has referred in a very sinister way to what happens at the end of life when they obviously want to give you a big push. His man Orsag, the bean counter, pointy-headed advocate over there at the federal budget, OMB, he doesn't like tests. He thinks that MRIs and CAT scans and mammograms are a bad thing. Orsag has talked about moving on after the health care reform to Medicare 2.0, which is the gouging of Medicare. They're all supporting something called MedPAC on steroids, MedPAC being a board of Malthusian, genocidal, euthanasia-minded bureaucrats, some of them doctors, but it doesn't matter, who will then dictate the policies of health care to the rest of the country. This is sinister beyond belief. Another genocidalist, of course, Daschle, who was going to be the point man for all of this, in his book indicates that old people should die to defend the bottom line of the system. Sibelius, a cold, cruel purveyor of euthanasia and genocide. Baucus, the Senate Finance Committee chairman, now shown to be extremely corrupt on the payroll of the health insurance companies. The Obama White House has been forced to disgorge 25 top health for-profit executives that have been hobnobbing with Obama. And then perhaps the most repulsive of all, John Holdren, the anti-science advisor to Obama, talks about de-development and forced sterilization in quest of population reduction, therefore genocide. So I'm afraid with this crew, the only thing to do is to fight them to a standstill. However, in the arguments of Limbaugh and Hannity, we can see what their goal is. They want to defeat Obama and then go on to destroy Medicare, Medicaid, and Social Security. Their idea is to use the defeat of Obama, which has now been brought closer by the ineptitude of Obama, as well as the genocidal overtones of the team that he's put together, to go further. In other words, the name of the game for these reactionary Republicans is what it's always been, the destruction of the New Deal institutions and the New Deal state. And they've been targeting, right, Newt Gingrich says back in the mid-'90s, we're going to let Medicare die on the vine, let it wither on the vine, strangle it slowly. Well, when you hear the Hannitys and Limbaughs, their arguments against any form of health care reform now sometimes kick over inadvertently. They're carried away by their own genocidal fury to the idea that they want to take away Medicare. Orsag says Medicare 2.0. These people say zero, nothing. Without Medicare, there are tens of millions and hundreds of millions of old people that would have lost decades off their lives because of the traditional poverty-stricken status of senior citizens. So we don't want that. It's time now for a positive alternative to emerge somewhere to Obama's left, maybe inside the Democratic Party, maybe outside. But to Obama's left, we're going to need an anti-war alternatives, people who say no to the Afghan war, get out of Afghanistan, stop meddling, no NATO expansion, no Georgia, no Ukraine, stop the Polish missile crisis and related issues, and anti-Wall Street. Put a stop to the $23 trillion that Obama is transferring to the Wall Street banks. And indeed, your main goal ought to be to come up with a government plan, a Medicare for all plan for anybody who wants it. Nobody forced to take it, but Medicare for all if you want it, that could then solve the problem of the 50 million who have no coverage, because that's the real big issue. The 50 million people out there, a nation about the size of France or Italy or Britain, who don't have any health insurance at all and who are dying, right? 18,000 a year die, according, again, to Black Agenda Report and their excellent write-up on this subject. So that's that. Now, in terms of the issue. Ron Paul, unfortunately, this week has said there is no right to health care. Well, that's simply wrong. There is a right to health care. This is now one of the main bones of contention. I contend that Americans, that human beings in general, have, of course, political rights, social rights, and economic rights. That is the position for which I stand. And if you're not in favor of that, I don't know what you're doing in politics. The American system, of course, is based on these ideas, the general welfare. The general welfare means an evolving conception dictated by economic progress, technological progress, science, and related developments of what it takes to function as labor power in the world that you're going to have to live in. In other words, we need to make sure that families have a level of health and education which allows them to take their places in the high technology, capital-intensive economy which we intend will prevail during the 21st century. And that, of course, changes. Let's take an example. The Declaration of Independence says life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Let's focus on the life. What does life mean? Well, in 1776, the element of medical care, of science, was in its infancy. There were some things they could do for you. You could get a smallpox vaccination, for example, but it does not loom as large at that time as it does at this point. The reason we need longevity, of course, is if we're going to give people 8 or 10 years of advanced training so that they can take their places in advanced science, that means they have to live longer. We need longevity because without longevity, we cannot give people adequate training, which takes a certain number of years out of the average working life. So this is an imperative. If you say that life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness does not include today under the life heading, if you say that life does not include adequate medical care, this is a step backward. This is, in effect, the life, liberty, and property of John Locke, which the American system rejects. And we can go through the bankruptcy of John Locke from many points of view. So I'm afraid Ron Paul is tragically wrong. There is no mystery on this. Ron Paul argues that it's so complicated that if you assert the right, you're going to have the opposite effect. Economics is not a mystery. We know how economics works. We simply know that these elements must be provided. Now, how you do it is, of course, another issue. And in order to do that, the things that are missing from the current debate, you've got to build 1,000 hospitals. You've got a deficit of 500,000 hospital beds, even compared to the Hill-Burton guidelines of 4.5 beds per 1,000 population issued in 1946. We're currently at 3.2 beds per 1,000. Hill-Burton said 4.5 to 5.5. Today, we should be at 6 beds per 1,000 population minimum. So we've got 1,000 hospitals to build and then more on top of that. There's also the question of where are you going to get your doctors? What are you doing to promote medical education? A woman came on television this week to say that she came out of med school with $300,000 of debt and she can't afford to be a general practitioner. Some obvious reform is necessary there. So the point of putting that into the Constitution was the freedom from want plank of the Atlantic Charter of August 1941, signed by Roosevelt and Churchill. It is, in effect, the platform on which the American GI was asked to fight and die in World War II for that society. Then, of course, the reactionary Republicans torpedoed it, and, of course, Harry Truman's demolition operation against the New Deal majority was instrumental in aborting this possibility. But Roosevelt went through in the State of the Union, January 1944, a series of 8 rights: the right to medical care, to a home, to a job, to an education, to a retirement, to medical care, and if you're a small businessman, not to be crushed by monopoly competition a la Walmart, and if you're a farmer, not to be crushed by low-wage foreign imports and so forth. Those principles are valid, and the great unfinished business of American society is to realize them today. So we have to say no to the reactionary Republicans, and I'm afraid that this is a broad coalition. What we're going to need is to put aside this notion of balancing the budget. That is insanity in a depression. That's pure Herbert Hoover, to name another Republican, and we're going to see the failure of Schwarzenegger. So a Tobin tax for California, A 1% securities transfer tax creates hundreds of millions of billions of dollars of revenue and solves the crisis without destroying civilization in our largest state. We'll see you next week on World Crisis Radio. Remember those books, Obama the Postmodern Coup, Surviving the Cataclysm, and Obama the